complaint is they didn't send it to me. That's my only complaint.
Did you get a badge?
But it was good. Interactivity was good. I mean, one guy complained that he couldn't email the teacher, but there were 60,000 people taking the course, so that's kind of understandable. But I don't know. I mean, the point I didn't actually encounter any of this kind of rhetoric that's up on the board, because I just took the course. I didn't read any newspaper articles about it. The kind of what I read there and what I read from what other people were saying on forums and so on is a much more grounded kind of discourse on the value or lack of value of that. It's not, people don't feel that their experience is devalued by the fact that somebody actually owns the company.
I wonder how many people dropped out of that course.
Well, but if I tell you, I only know what they told me, and that was probably a lie. Right? But 20,000. They said 40,000 completed. 60,000.
40,000 completed.
What's the title?
Sound design. Sound design.
Has there been a distinction? I mean, we're talking about learner types in a way, aren't we? Has there been a distinction made between the different types of learners? My observation of Coursera is they're highly motivated and often from professional backgrounds. And institutions are looking at it from, well, what way are they looking at it? I mean, if I look at your typical Hong Kong student in first year higher education, they're not the same type of learners that you'll see in a MOOC.
But the testimonials that you'll see in the Coursera stuff is from people with internet access outside of the United States who say that access to this course changed their lives, and that they could never have ever had this kind of quality. And that's the rhetoric that they're using to promote the value. And I mean, when Daphne Koller says, with tears in her eyes, that people have got access to her course, I believe her. I mean, I don't think that she's bullshitting. She's saying that people outside of Stanford have got access to these programs.
She probably isn't, but as I said, a lot of them. So another example of a thing that started with this social good that Neil mentioned is badges, right? Where the idea of, look, we know kids are doing stuff out of school that is very, very good. Some of these are poor kids who they don't get credit for stuff in school. So here we're going to give them an alternative system that can give them credit, give them stuff for what their real achievements are. But then you say, okay, somebody has to sustain this financially and somebody has to validate it, and pretty soon it's caught up with all of the issues. And I guess one of the things that, as these things were happening, we all should have worried about is not just the beginning idea, and not how you sustained it alone financially, but how you kept it from being co-opted by the other systems, and people don't know a lot about that.
I have a question for Neil. I'm sort of shifting the focus from MOOCs back to this deschooling discourse that you mentioned, this more radical perspective. You mentioned Sugata Mitra and the hole in the wall and that sort of thing. I had the experience of being in the country of Uruguay recently, where they have the One Laptop per Child initiative, and sort of coincidentally with my visit, I had nothing to do with that specifically, but Mitra was giving a talk that was of course sponsored by Pearson. And it was full, packed auditorium full of teachers, probably 200 teachers. And after he gave a very charismatic presentation about why teachers are no longer relevant, why you just give a kid a computer and a good question and sort of send them on their way, the response was like a 10-minute standing ovation. So I think not just guru, but more of like a messiah. And so I'm wondering what it is, like why are teachers, why are they so excited by these discourses that are telling them that they're no longer relevant and their skills and their training and all of this isn't applicable anymore?
It's interesting the take-up of One Laptop per Child in South America, because there's been quite a lot of anti-rhetoric from teaching unions, for example, in Peru. So I'm not sure who that audience would be, but there's been quite a lot of local resistance, both in Uruguay and Peru. And most interestingly in India, because One Laptop per Child have been trying to get into India for years and years and years, and the Indian government resisted at many, many different levels, primarily because they wanted to develop an indigenous device. It's actually turned out to be the $50 smartphone or tablet. So what's interesting about One Laptop per Child, I find, is the localised resistance from country to country. It's never actually really taken root successfully, apart from Nigeria, Uruguay, Peru, and even in Uruguay, Peru, and Nigeria, there's been a lot of resistance. So So I guess there might be a few techie teachers that would go along with some literature talk that might kind of, whoop and holler, because they're the first category of enthusiasts and, the innovative teachers that are tinkering around the edges. But certainly in terms of the union response, and even the kind of family responses, the whole idea of burdening the family with this very valuable laptop. Mark Warshaw has done some really interesting research on how the one laptop per child has been taken up. He's certainly done Peru, whether he's done Europe or not, I'm not sure, but that tells a completely different story. And I'm really interested in the localised resistance to these top-down things. Same with MOOCs as well, really interesting to see how they actually do spin out in practice. The politics are fascinating.
Maybe your kind of technology teaching disciples, if you like. I mean, they're trying to differentiate themselves from a different generation of teachers. I mean, technology enables them to do that, to create the kind of them and us. They are seen as the innovator class.
Interestingly, I think the audience were not,
generational change.
we're not the younger generation.
That's
Those
what
were
in
people
terms
who
of
have been teaching
demographic,
for
were
30
they older?
Yeah, they were older.
I mean, people like Mitchell are really interesting because none of them is stupid. And so I think it's a positive project. I don't think he's trying to make money or anything. And it's what James, that's the whole point of my talk, was what James was saying there about the co-option of these ideas into other agendas. And it's, I think that needs to be unpicked. And it's very, but it's also not good enough just to say, oh, we all hate these things because it's all big companies. I mean, the MOOCs are here and, they're not necessarily bad. I think Phil got his sound design course out of it, and they work for some people, so I think there needs to be much more kind of nuanced reaction to it.
Right.
Thanks for both of your presentations. I was really, well, it resonated with me what I was thinking in my mind when you talked about deja vu, because I did secondary school teacher training in North America, in Canada actually, in the early 90s, and it was, well, it was exactly the same, basically. It was exactly the same. We all got tired of it a long time ago. And I mean, public school teachers. I'm not a public school teacher anymore, but you get really jaded. You get blamed if the thing doesn't go well, and if it, but the thing I really wanted to say was that, computers aside, one of the basic issues that came up in our teacher training at the time, that was brought up by our instructors, was this whole back to basics discourse. And I wonder how much this is being driven by that neocon sort of discourse, because it's very, at the time, this was what was being problematized in our classes, is what is basic and what is back to basics. And this idea that the basics really are helping children and young people to be more humane. This was the idea. And I know, and as soon as you say something like that, you get written off. But I say it anyway, because in the end, back to basics means education is all about, reading, writing, and arithmetic, that kind of thing. And in the end, it doesn't tend to be, though. In the system we've got now, there's this idea that somehow we're not just trying to create a bunch of really skilled people to go out and do evil things. Like Google says, don't be evil, And so, this back to basics discourse, do you think it's driving some of this whole...
What's interesting about in the UK, we had 15 years of digital literacy, critical digital literacy, getting kids to create, blah, blah, blah. And then we had a new government come in, and they are pushing a much more back to basics agenda in the curriculum. And if you look at how the ICT, which is what we used to call our computer curriculum, has changed, there's a huge political debate about it at the moment. It's gone completely back to basics. So it's switched from digital literacy, creativity, connectivity, blah, 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 to computer coding. There's a new curriculum, there's a new computing curriculum coming in 2014, the main strand of which is computer science. So primary schools and secondary schools will learn programming skills, and there's these things called the Raspberry Pis, and it's all this back to basics. And if you look at how that's been driven, there was no interest in the government, the new coalition government, about technology whatsoever. They weren't going to have it at all. It wasn't part of the back to basics curriculum. And then there was a movement that came around. Eric Schmidt came over, gave a talk at the Edinburgh Television Festival, and said, I can't believe that this country that invented the BBC Micro has no more computer games industry and no, digital skills. All of a sudden the government sees prick up, economy, global economy, digital skills program. And it's gone to back to basics. There's now 4 R's. I don't know how you'd say coding was an R, but it's now it's just, we want people to work in the computing industry.
I think that's great. I think kids should know how to code. I wish I knew how to code more. Because I think that is a way to develop critical literacy.
Precisely.
Because you start to understand what's behind that.
That's not the coding that's been pushed. You've got on the one hand, you've got the government saying, Douglas Rushkoff, programming will be programming, and all this stuff, and that's really important. That's not what actually is now taking place in the classroom. It's about learning skills for the 21st century digital workplace. And all that CDL stuff that could happen around it, and I think is really important. You need to open up the black box of these things to really that's not at all what's going on. It's fascinating how people like the British Computer Society that represent computer programs and computer professionals are driving us back to basics in general.
So I'd be interested to see if this is happening in England or not, but there's a profound contradiction in the change of colleges in America caught up with this, because both the Democrats and the Republicans want to have more people go to college for jobs. That's why they push things like programming. And by the way, Gates and the Facebook guy pushed all children programming because it will lower the cost of programmers. But the fact is, if you say schooling is about jobs and we want to reform it to be about jobs to be equitable, for developed societies where 3/5 of all the jobs are poorly paid service workers and we've eviscerated our unions and living wages, you are essentially, and the basics basically means what you're going to need at Walmart, our biggest employer. You're basically saying your whole school system is basically to produce jobs for a society that has mainly only bad jobs. And it's a profound contradiction, but it's one that never gets discussed as we hype Coursera into these other, artificial tutors, adaptive technologies. I think it's why it's so crucial today that education people should never discuss technology or schools apart in society. And this idea that schools are producing 19th century industry, no they're not, they're producing 21st century service workers. The biggest employer in America is Walmart, by far.
Absolutely. And so the discourse around coding, everyone then going into very high-paid game developing jobs is obviously rubbish. But it's that low-level information processing jobs that actually they're services.
And that's the same reason why Gates and other people want a completely open immigration, because they want cheap technical workers.
Yeah.
They don't love immigrants, they love cheap workers.
So what I was trying to get at in my talk was we need to reorientate the conversation around this to all of the stuff that Rodney's talking about at the end. So very critical potential. But anyway.
Okay, well, let's thank the two this speaker.
Oh yeah, just before we go to lunch, a quick announcement about the publication coming out of this roundtable. If you don't mind, if you're not involved in the publications, can we ask to take the lunch ahead, and we can just have a quick